Hi there, my name is Brandy M. Miller, and I am a co-author of Free to Choose Forgiveness, an Anthology by Dr. Norma McLauchlin. And I'm going to read for you my passage out of this book called Learning to Shine Through the Darkness. My life has been filled with darkness, but darkness is the canvas that allows the stars to shine most brilliantly. It is in that darkness that God can shine a light so bright that those living in it can find their way to Him, and those seeking wisdom's compass will be guided to it. My last and only childhood memory of my father is me sitting on the back porch steps, watching from a distance as my sister's dog chased him, nipping at his heels, while he hollered, "Someone come get this dang dog off of me." My heart ached to help my father, but I was afraid of that dog. He'd never forgotten, or forgiven, that I'd had a habit of pulling his ears as a toddler, and he would bite me repeatedly any time I got close to him. He was afraid I was going to hurt him again. He hadn't realized I'd outgrown that stage of my life. I'd never meant to hurt him. I just hadn't known my own strength, and my playful tugging had been more than he could stand. My mother and sister were in the kitchen doing the dishes. My mother could hear my father through that open door, but she ignored him. My sister was angry with him, so she ignored him too. But even if she hadn't been, she wouldn't have dared defy my mother and left the dishes to go get her dog. Neither of them could forgive my father for his failings as a father and a husband. My mother had a new man in her life, one she believed was an upgrade. My father decided she was right, and that we didn't need him in our lives anymore. He'd come over that day to say goodbye before leaving for Mississippi. He never came back, and I wouldn't see him again until I was 24 years old. My 4-year-old heart didn't understand what was happening, so it wrote a short story about why the man who had so often told me he loved me more than anything else in the world could just walk away and not look back. That story read, "I am not lovable." After all, if the man who loved me more than anything else in the world could just walk away and not look back, how lovable could I be? It never occurred to me, because I was too young to know such things, that his leaving had nothing to do with me, and everything to do with how broken he was on the inside. My mother and father met in a psychiatric ward. My father was a paranoid schizophrenic, and he knew how broken he was. He just didn't know how to fix it. My mother was the ward secretary of the unit. She knew how broken he was, and she thought she could fix it. She didn't know how broken she was, or how incapable of fixing him she happened to be. That was a job only God could do, but neither of them thought to turn that brokenness over to God and ask for His help in healing it. My mother couldn't see how much healing she needed, or how much she needed God's love in her life. Without God's help to guide them, the two of them just broke each other even more until my mother couldn't take being hurt anymore. She filed for divorce and found herself someone new. My father felt the best thing he could do for everyone involved was to leave. He had no idea where to even begin cleaning the mess he'd made, so that mess he'd made spilled over into my life and the life of my siblings. Every failure of his from that point forward only cemented the anger and bitterness my mother felt toward the man whom she saw as being to blame for the failures in her life. The only mistake she could see she'd made was in marrying him. She didn't see the way her own brokenness contributed to his breakdowns, or how things she said and the way she said them devastated a heart that was too fragile to handle such treatment. My stepfather, as it turns out, was not the upgrade she'd thought he would be. While his public face was that of someone who was a thoughtful and well-mannered gentleman who had generously taken on the burdens of raising another man's children out of love for their mother, that was not the face he presented at home. At home, he was self-centered and manipulative, with a temper that would rise suddenly and strike without warning. He delighted in terrifying my brother and me by threatening us with the leather belt he loved to use when delivering discipline. My tender-hearted and gentle-natured brother was my stepfather's favorite target for his beatings. I can remember once counting as he lashed that boy 27 times for whatever crime he perceived my brother had committed. What made it worse was that my mother was present when these things happened and did not stop them. There were worse things than the physical beatings, though. My stepfather was a big fan of some twisted and perverted literature that encouraged the sexualization of children as being normal and natural. By the time I was in first grade, he taught me how to perform oral sex on him. I told my mother about what he was doing, and she took no action except to confront him. He assured her that I was the one who'd initiated it, and he wouldn't do it again. But my mother never asked me, or checked to be sure that this was true. After what he considered his near brush with my mother, he confronted me and warned me that if I talked again, my mother would call the police and we would end up homeless and starving on the streets, because he was the only one bringing in any money. I knew he was right. Without his income, we wouldn't make it. However, instead of assuring my silence as he had thought such a threat would do, he unwittingly gave me the encouragement I needed to continue seeking to put a stop to his reign of terror the only way I knew how, by speaking up. 2.5 years later, I told my mother again. This time, she did take it to the police. I found out that day I wasn't the only one being molested. My older sister and younger brother were too. However, because my sister was old enough that reporters could mention her name in the papers, she refused to testify against him. My brother was considered too young to be a credible witness. Since he'd never penetrated us anally or vaginally, there was no physical evidence available to use in convicting him. The entire case rested on my shoulders. If I didn't testify, he would go free. My siblings turned on me, blaming me for the loss of his income and everything that was going wrong in our lives at the time. My mother sank into depression and was unable to see that I needed her. At the age of 9, I briefly considered suicide, but ultimately decided I couldn't bear the pain it would involve. The therapists the state ordered me to see were incensed that I was not angry and bitter against my stepfather for what he had done. They wanted me to be, but I knew Jesus had told me to forgive, and I stuck to my guns. I didn't want to hurt my stepfather. I just wanted to stop him from hurting my family and me. My mother told me during that time that he could be healed with the right treatment. She assured me that with work we could have a normal family I wanted. I accepted her words and cooperated with her in trying to help him get a reduced sentence or, if possible, probation. I felt bitter disappointment when he was sentenced to 21 years in prison despite my efforts. Our normal family would never come to be. For 8 months we made monthly trips to visit him and exchanged letters. Then came the letter that ended things for good for my mother. The letter denied that my stepfather had ever done anything to hurt us. It denied that we ever had any reason to fear him. He was completely in denial of the pain and suffering he had caused us. I could forgive the pain and suffering he'd caused, but I could not forgive the denial of it. I could not hold on to hope for a future with him while he denied the past pain he'd caused. Anger and outrage were sparked in my heart, and I became filled with hatred toward him. My brother, the same brother who had received the worst of my stepfather's many abuses, was not willing to write my stepfather off along with the rest of us. I began punishing him for his gentle heart, in many ways worse than my stepfather had done. My anger and rage poured out on my brother to the point where one day I found myself on top of him, actively choking him, intent on killing him. Fortunately, a very calm and logical part of my brain saw what was going on and kicked into gear. You do realize that if you kill your brother, they will put you in jail. Is that really what you want? I didn't. I let go of my brother and got off him. My rage subsided, and I felt ashamed of myself. My stepfather was not worth this. He was not worth going to jail for, and he was not worth killing my brother over. It was about that time that I began to read Little Women. I empathized with Jo Marsh, whose vicious temper nearly killed her younger sister, Amy. I found Marmie's advice on how to manage a hot temper both timely and something I could use to help gain control of myself. When I felt anger or rage coming on, I would find some positive use for my anger and go clean something. Restoring order to the chaos helped me to restore order to the chaos of my emotions. At age 12, The same dog that had held me at bay from coming to my father's rescue at age 4 was hit by a car. Moved with compassion, I came to his rescue. I went with him to the vet because my older sister couldn't bear the thought of putting him down. Fortunately, that didn't prove necessary. The same dog who hadn't forgotten the way that I hurt him when I was little didn't forget the kindness that I showed him when he was hurting and helpless. We became friends after that day. At 14, I read Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. In that book, he revealed that most people who do terrible things to other people don't see themselves as villains. They see themselves as misunderstood heroes, or as victims of circumstance trying to defend themselves from being hurt. It was Orson Scott Card's book, Ender's Game, though, that taught me the dangers of refusing to forgive. The biggest danger in refusing to forgive is that you will eventually become an even bigger monster than the one that hurt you. It also taught me to try and understand the motives of the people who hurt you because, quite often, they aren't hurting you intentionally. The pain they cause is a byproduct of them trying to heal a wound or fulfill an unmet need, and they don't even see you or how what they're doing is impacting you. I chose to forgive my stepfather. I decided that hate was a burden too heavy for my shoulders to carry, and I would lay it down. That decision led me to a realization. When my stepfather came into my life, he was just 24 years old. How badly must someone have broken him for him to think it was okay to do what he did to me and my siblings? He wasn't powerful, and he no longer had power over me. He was weak, pathetic, and sad. In that moment, I felt such pity for him. The forgiveness was easy. Of all the people I blamed for what happened to me as a child, God was highest on my list. I feuded with him and fumed at him, rejecting his words and his promises and fleeing his church at 17, because I felt he'd failed me. A son was born to me at the age of 19. God was giving me a chance to make up for the mistakes women of the past had made by giving me the power to shape and mold a good man, one who would treat women with respect and dignity, instead of as objects to be used and abused. I wanted my son to know his family history, because I'd been deprived of my family history due to my parents' divorce and the divorce of my mother's parents. I sought out my father, not sure what to expect, and found that he'd loved me all along, but he'd been afraid to reach out to me. He was afraid he was too broken for me to want. I learned that one of the greatest gifts you can give to another soul is to offer them forgiveness at a time in their life when they feel they are least worthy of it. My father and I were reconciled, and parts of me that I had never understood began to make sense as I connected with the side of my family from whom I had inherited those traits. At 27, just 2 months before my son's 8th birthday, he was standing in my room, looking me in the eyes, telling me not only that he was going to kill himself, but exactly how he was going to do it. And he had a backup plan in case that first plan didn't work. I was devastated. How had I failed my baby so badly that death was preferable to life? My struggle to answer that question led to my reconciliation with God. I began to understand that he hadn't failed me. Everything he'd allowed to happen to me was allowed for me so that he could transform me into the woman he needed me to be in order to take my place in the heavens and shine among the stars. It was all part of his plan to answer my own prayers and transform me into the great saint that I wanted to become. My youngest sister was my stepfather's biological daughter. She was born after he went to prison, and she'd been a force sent to heal our wounded hearts and help us to form a bridge to bring us back together at a point when we were most divided. Now, she is a grown woman, and she wants to know her family, just as I had when I was younger. I knew from experience what it meant to me to finally connect with the family I'd never known. I told her, there are some parts of yourself you will never truly understand until you've met the part of the family those parts of yourself come from. I encouraged her to reach out to her father and meet him. You need to know the truth about who he is, good or bad, so you can accept that and make peace with it. My sister took my advice and let her father into my life. It caused all kinds of problems in the family. My mother, my brother, and my older sister were all opposed to it, But that was because they had not forgiven him, and they didn't want her to forgive him either. I have a relationship with my stepfather, and it is a good one, because I encouraged my sister to reach out to him. He's come to my rescue and in many ways been more of a father to me than my own father was. He has supported and encouraged me in my efforts to achieve my dreams. This was another powerful lesson about forgiveness. Refusing to forgive traps you and your target in time. You are stuck in their past, stuck in that past moment. The person who hurt you changes and evolves over time, just like you do. To refuse to forgive is to refuse to acknowledge the work that God may have done in their lives in the space between the last time you saw them and the present moment. My mother was the hardest for me to forgive because I held so many more expectations for what she should have been or done. Yet I fought to keep a relationship with her, and she fought to keep one with me. We hurt each other plenty, struggling to find a way forward, and it was God who finally helped me find that path and understand why things went so wrong. My mother didn't know how to be a mother. She'd been raised by someone who hadn't had a mother to mother her. My mom's own mother's mother had died when she was young, so she hadn't had a mother either. We were 4 generations of women, struggling to figure out how to mother without the proper models to work from, and we each broke our children because of it. In that moment, God showed me something. He taught me that sin is like a stone. When someone sins against you, they are throwing a little stone at you. Most people choose one of 3 responses to that stone. They take it and use it to build a wall around their hearts. They take it and put it in a kind of mental backpack so that nobody can ever hurt them with that stone again. Or they take those stones and start throwing them back at other people. All 3 responses have devastating consequences. The higher the wall gets built, the less light and love are reaching them, and the more they are depriving their hearts of what they need to live. They begin to die inside, but it's happening so gradually that they don't even notice it until it's too late. They become accustomed to the cold and the dark, and they tell themselves they are safer alone, but the danger is all around them. The second group, the backpackers, are getting more and more burdened by what they're carrying. They make less and less progress in their lives, grounded down and worn down by the stones they're carrying. They can't move quickly enough to get out of the way of the stone throwers, so they end up getting hurt more often than ever. And yet, they keep collecting stones and trying to carry them around. The third group, the stone throwers, are so incensed by the stones that get thrown at them that they pick them up and fling them in the direction they think those stones came from, not realizing that the person who threw the stone initially isn't there anymore. They've moved on, but some innocent person has taken their place. Now that person's wounded, and the person who started the whole thing has no idea the damage they've caused. In most cases, the stone throwers were either throwing by accident, unaware there was anyone there, or they were throwing to try and protect themselves from a danger that was no longer there. The best thing to do with the pain, God told me, is to take each stone and break it open. Trust that if He let it into my life, it is there for my good and His glory. Inside each painful stone is a precious gem, just waiting to be recovered and found, one that can be shared for the good of all. All I have to do is pass that stone to Him, and He will turn it into a gem that will enhance my life and improve my circumstances. Instead of weighing me down, it will propel me to the next level and transform me into the person I must be in order to achieve all that God intends for me. I hope you've enjoyed listening to this. Again, this is part of the Anthology, Free to Choose Forgiveness, which you can find on Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, or any other bookstore you like. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.